institutions. Previously, this series has focused on gender-responsive economic recovery and how to bounce back better, and on the future of work, upskilling for the post-pandemic world. Today, our focus will be on women's collectives, change makers from the ground up. The session will host a special keynote address and an insightful panel discussion. Please join me in welcoming our guest today. Our keynote speaker is Giriraj Singh, Minister of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj. Our panelists for today's discussion are Neeta Kejriwal, Joint Secretary, National Rural Livelihood Mission, Ministry of Rural Development; Chetna Sinha, Founder and Chairperson, Mandeshi Bank and Mandeshi Foundation; Anjani Kochar, Senior Research Fellow at 3IE; Bijal Brahmat, Director, Gujarat Mahila Housing Seva Trust; Madhu Krishna, Deputy Director, Gender Equality, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation; Hasina Kharbi, Founder and Chairperson, Impulse NGO Network. We will also have Anirudh Brahmachari, Head of Research Operations and Senior M&E Expert Lead at Kriya University, for the concluding remarks. Today's session will be moderated by Rinku Ghosh, Editor, Special Projects, The Indian Express. May I please request everyone to stay connected to the session on social media as well, using the hashtag #GenderInIndia. I will now request Rinku to please share the introductory note with us.
Thank you, Pooja. So this is a very important conversation we do as part of the I Think dialogues on gender. So today we are doing on women's collectives, change makers from the ground up. Mahatma Gandhi had once said, "Give women access to economic activities and they will have access to power and self-confidence to which they hitherto have been strangers." And nothing proves this better than the fact that our ASHA workers, who have won the WHO's Global Health Leader Award for their frontline stewardship of COVID-19 management, have made such a difference to global management of a pandemic, much better than health workers anywhere. In fact, India has proven time and again that its women collectives can change the social, economic, cultural, and political indices of a nation. Our self-help groups and women cooperative-led movements have led to their financial inclusion, economic stakeholdership, restoration of land rights, and access to social justice. In short, when you let women take the lead, and when women do take the lead, they can write their own story. And what better way to write the story than to be a part of India's biggest collective, the National Rural Livelihood Mission. It is one of the largest community mobilization efforts anywhere in the world, organizing more than 70 million poor women into self-help groups. And who better to talk about it than the Minister for Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, Giriraj Singh. Earlier in the day, I met Development and Panchayati Raj, Giriraj Singh. Earlier in the day, I met him to talk about the biggest mission that engages women. And he shared with me his goal of taking it to the next level, not just self-employment now, but self-entrepreneurship. So let's listen in to the keynote speaker of the day, Minister of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, Shri Giriraj Singh.
देखिए, देश के अंदर में आधी आबादी नहीं बल्कि पहले तो आज़ादी के समय 75%, 80% गांव गरीब किसान थे, लेकिन आज भी राउंड अबाउट 70%, 68% ग्रामीण इलाके होते हैं। और इसमें जो मेरे जानकारी में है 19.5 करोड़ लगभग ग्रामीण घर हैं, 19.5 करोड़। और इस 19.5 करोड़ 19.5 करोड़ ये वही हैं, इसमें 80% मेरे समझ से जिसे गरीब कह सकते हैं, गरीब हैं, लोअर मिडिल इनकम ग्रुप के हैं। सोशियो इकोनॉमिक कास्ट सेंसस में इनकी आबादी लगभग 10 करोड़ से ऊपर है। अब आपने देखा होगा कोरोना काल में अगर कोई सबसे ज़्यादा फ्रंट लाइन पे काम किया, तो ये गांव की महिलाओं ने, जिसे आशा वर्कर कहते हैं। और उसके बाद अभी हम जिस विभाग का मैं मंत्री हूं, ग्रामीण विकास एवं पंचायती राज, हम लोगों ने तय किया है कि 2024 तक 10 करोड़ घरों तक पहुंचे। क्यों पहुंचे? उन्हें सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप जो एनआरएलएम का, मैंने एनआरएलएम के अंदर में आजीविका मिशन के तहत उनको लाए। क्यों लाए? तो सैकड़ों उदाहरण है जब वो सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप से नहीं जुड़ी थी, कोई विडो हो गई, किसी की पति की हत्या हो गई, बेसहारा हो गई, अब गरीब है, कई ऐसे गरीब हैं जो सड़कों पे लेबर का काम नहीं कर सकती, लेकिन उन्हें कुछ जीने के लिए चाहिए। आज एनआरएलएम आजीविका मिशन ऐसे महिलाओं का एक संबल बना है, एक आधार बना है। और मैं फक्र के साथ कहूंगा कि नरेंद्र मोदी जब आए थे सत्ता में, तो 2014 में केवल 2 करोड़ 35 लाख घरों से जुड़ाव था और 80,000 करोड़ बैंक लिंकेज था और एनपीए 9.58 था, यानी लगभग 10%। लेकिन जब मोदी जी आ गए तो कमाल का हुआ। जब मैं आज आपसे बात कर रहा हूं, आज 8 करोड़ 35 लाख बहनें जुट चुकी हैं। कहां 2 करोड़ 35 लाख, आज 8 करोड़ 35 लाख। और वही नहीं, कहां 80,000 और आज 5.9 लाख करोड़ बैंक लिंकेज हो गया। और एनपीए घट के मेरे ख्याल से 2.5 से नीचे आ गया है। तो ये एक ई गवर्नेंस का मिसाल है। मैं तो कहता हूं कई इंडस्ट्री के सेक्टर में मैं एमएसएमई में भी काम कर चुका हूं, मोदी जी के मंत्रिपरिषद में। आज इससे कम एनपीए किसी सेक्टर में नहीं है। मैं उसे 1% पर लाने वाला हूं। ये तो मैंने स्ट्रक्चर आपको बताया, लेकिन मुझे पीड़ा तब कि मोदी जी को जब ये 19-20 साल से ये महिलाओं के उत्थान के लिए, उनके कैपेसिटी के लिए, उनके हैंड होल्डिंग के लिए, उनके आर्थिक उत्थान के लिए ऐसे स्कीम चल रहे थे। लेकिन मैं जब लिया कि इनकी आमदनी कितनी है, ये 5 लाख करोड़ और 4 लाख करोड़ पैसा तो दिया, सेल्फ कंजम्पशन, किसी को जरूरत हुआ घर के लिए तो वो तो ठीक है, साहूकारों से छुटकारा मिल गया। लेकिन अब मेरा उद्देश्य है कि हमारी बहनों की आमदनी कम से कम मिशन 1 लाख के रूप में, यानी 8,000 से 12,000 मंथली इनकम हो। और इस इनकम में मुझे लग रहा है कि एक नई छलांग हमारी बहनें लगाएंगी। 60%, 70% हमारी बहनें किस किस सेक्टर में काम कर रही हैं। वो बीसी सखी के रूप में बैंकों से, बैंक सखी के रूप में, ये दोनों दो है। एक बिजनेस कोरेस्पोंडेंट हो गया, एक बहनों को बैंक में मदद कराना, तो एक बीसी सखी, एक बैंक सखी, किसान सखी, पशु सखी, यानी मल्टी डायमेंशन में हमारी बहनों को अब मेरा जो लक्ष्य है कि जो 60-70% एग्रीकल्चर विथ एलाइड एनिमल हस्बेंड्री के साथ काम कर रही हैं, गाय पाल रही हैं, मुर्गी पाल रही हैं, सुअर पाल रही हैं, भैंस पाल रही हैं, बकरी पाल रही हैं। अब मेरा लक्ष्य है जो सीरियल क्रॉप कर रही हैं वो मिलेट और हॉर्टिकल्चर में आ जाए और इसका वैल्यू एडिशन करें। जो एनिमल हस्बेंड्री में लगी हूँ वो उसके मार्केट लिंकेज के नए मॉडल हो जाए जो सीधा लाभ इनको मिले। अब उन बहनों को इससे खुशी थी कि उनको पैसे की जरूरत हुआ, मुझे एसएचजी से मिल गया। अब मेरी खुशी है कि 2024 तक लाखपति बहन बना दें। अगर आप अंदाज करें कि 10 करोड़ बहन लाखपति बन गई तो भारत के जीडीपी में जेंडर एम्प्लॉयमेंट हम नहीं कह सकते, लेकिन जेंडर पॉपुलेशन का इनकम ग्रोथ अगर मिशन 1 लाख में हुआ तो भारत के जीडीपी में कितना का योगदान होगा। मैं देशवासी से कहना चाह रहा हूं, मैंने संकल्प लिया है कि पंचायत में हम जेंडर रोजगार, एम्प्लॉयमेंट शब्द का प्रयोग नहीं करूंगा, जेंडर रोजगार की व्यवस्था, महिलाओं को रोजगार। तो ये एक मेरा मिशन है और इसी मिशन के साथ, क्योंकि उन गरीब को मैंने देखा है, पत्रकारों ने पूछा कितनी कमाती हो, 6,000, अभी 8,000, 10,000। जब मैं बहनों से पूछता हूं कि आपकी आमदनी 3,000 में काम चल जाएगा, 5,000 हो जाए तो उनके चेहरे मुस्कुरा जाते हैं। जब 8 कहता हूं खुशी से उछल जाती है, और जब 10, 12, 15 कहता हूं तो उन्हें लगता है कि मैं क्या कह रहा हूं। और मेरा लक्ष्य है कि वो बहनों से जब बात करता हूं कि पैसा क्या करोगी, जिस बहन ने 8,000 रुपया महीना कमाई, वो पत्रकारों को दिखाती हैं कि मेरे घर का दीवार टूटा हुआ था, मैंने अपनी कमाई से दीवार तोड़ा, घर मेरे खुले थे, मेरी बेटी स्कूल जाती थी, कपड़े गंदे कपड़े थे, कपड़े नहीं थे, स्कूल ड्रेस नहीं थे। आंख से आंसू आ जाता है, वो अपनी बेटियों को कपड़े खरीद के देती है। इसलिए मेरा लक्ष्य है कि मिशन 1 लाख 2024 तक हम पूरा करें। जिस दिन हम पूरा करेंगे उसके लिए कई स्कीम है, इंटरप्राइजेज के तहत उनको इंटरप्राइजेज में ले जा रहे हैं, फार्मर प्रोड्यूसर कंपनी बना रहे हैं, क्लस्टर बना रहे हैं, फ्लिपकार्ट से जोड़ रहे हैं, अमेजोन से जोड़ रहे हैं, स्टेट को मार्केट लिंकेज कर रहे हैं। कनॉट प्लेस पर हमने 12 खम्बा रोड पर एक शोरूम भी खुलवाया है। तो इस ढंग से स्टेट को भी कहा है कि इनको मार्केट अवेलेबल कराओ। और मेरा पूरा है, अब तो हम ऑर्गेनिक सेक्टर में भी महिलाओं का योगदान। कल ही मैं बेगूसराय अपने कंस्टिट्यूंसी के एक बहन से, बखरी एक सब डिवीजन है, उनसे मैंने एक ग्रीन फर्टिलाइजर बनाया, 2 मेट्रिक टन बनाया। 1-2 एकड़ जमीन थी, 2 क्विंटल 4 क्विंटल उपयोग किया, 10 रुपये किलो बेची, फसल भी अच्छा हुआ और उनके चेहरे पे खुशी थी कि मैंने इसे बेच करके अच्छी खासी रकम भी कमाई। तो मैं आने वाले दिन में भारत में एक रेवोल्यूशन, जो आज जो केमिकल फर्टिलाइजर लाखों लाख हम सब्सिडी दे रहे हैं, मैं इसको भी कम करने का माध्यम बहनों को बनाने का काम करूंगा। ये मेरा लक्ष्य है और इस पे काम हो रहा है। इंडस्ट्रियल में जो नॉन एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर है उसमें हमारा हैंडीक्राफ्ट में ज़्यादा है। कोई बांस पे काम कर रही हैं, कोई केले पर काम कर रही हैं, कोई गेहूं का आटा बना रही हैं, कोई मिलेट का बिस्किट बना रही हैं, तरह तरह से काम कर रही हैं। मैं उनको मार्केटिंग, ब्रांडिंग, पैकेजिंग भी दे करके देश के सामने में compete करने के लिए मैं एक नया प्रयोग शुरू कर रहा हूं। और मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि आने वाले दिन में जब ये मेरा सारा हो जाएगा, मेरी जुबान रुक रहा है, रुक इसलिए रहा है कि मेरी उम्मीदें जरूरत से ज़्यादा नहीं, कि अगर एक महिला साल में 1 लाख तो बहुत छोटी रकम है, कहीं तक जा सकती है। हम त्रिपुरा गए थे, एक बहन खड़ी होकर बोली कि मैं 30,000 रुपया महीना कमा रही हूँ, ये त्रिपुरा में। तो मैं राज्यों में जा रहा हूँ और मैं देख रहा हूँ कि बहनों में एक नए उत्साह के साथ लोग बढ़ रहे हैं। मैं अभी मेघालय गया था, वहाँ भी बहनों ने कहा मुझे और ऊंचाई पर ले जाना है, और मैं समझता हूँ कि जिस दिन भारत में ये ग्रामीण आबादी को, आधी आबादी 19.5 करोड़ घर हैं, इसमें ने 20% 30% मान लिया है। ऐसे मैंने सोशियो इकोनॉमिक कास्ट सेंसस में अभी टारगेट लिया है 10 करोड़, लेकिन मेरा लक्ष्य है कोई ग्रामीण महिला जो इससे जुड़ना चाहती हैं न छूटें, और आने वाले दिन में ये जो 5.9 लाख करोड़ है इसके टर्नओवर को भी आपके सामने में मैं रखूंगा और देश को बताऊंगा एक नए एंटरप्रेन्योर जो गांव में रह के, आज जिस दिन आधी आबादी के हाथ में पैसा आ गया तो भारत के जीडीपी में एक बड़ा योगदान हो जाएगा। यही मेरा संकल्प है।
For shedding light on Mission 1 Lakh, and which is a great accelerator for women's cooperative and women's collective movements. And if indeed this becomes a reality whereby 10 crore women are added to the program, and if each of them earns 1 lakh per annum, then definitely they are not only contributing to the GDP, they are becoming a very valued human resource asset for this country. They are not just women. So let's now move on to the panel discussion, taking off from the minister's remarks. So we have with us, let me introduce you, Neeta Kejriwal, Joint Secretary, NRLM. She looks after NRLM. We have Chekma Sinha.
Yes.
Founder Chairperson, Mandeshi Bank, Mandeshi Foundation. We have Anjani Kochar, Senior Research Fellow at TIE. We have Madhu Krishna, Deputy Director, Gender Equality, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have Hasina Kharbi, Founder and Chairperson, Impulse NGO Network. And we have two special messages and from the ground, not only messages, but first-hand experiences of the transformative power of women collectives, and that is Bala Murugan D, Secretary, Rural Development Department, Government of Bihar. He implemented the WHO Jivika campaign. And Lakini Barua, who is the founder of Kanaklata Mahila Urban Cooperative Bank. So I will begin with Ms. Kejriwal for the simple reason that after the minister's speech, I would like to build her on what he described as Mission 1 Lakh campaign. Ms. Kejriwal, NRLM's ambitious plan is to create 600 model cluster level federations. And I believe a lot of ministries are coordinating with your ministry to really make this collective deliverable project and realize targets in terms of encouraging women not only to increase their life earnings, but to make them business women in their own right. So can you share some light on these intensive campaigns that you have just started in the form of model cluster level federations? Take us through that.
Thank you, Rinku. First of all, I'd like to thank all the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk about various interventions of NRLM. जो आपने अभी प्रश्न पूछा क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस, मॉडल क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस के बारे में, एक्चुअली हम 600 नहीं, करीब 1500 मॉडल क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस सेटअप करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. सो ये जो क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस हैं, ये एक्चुअली जो एपेक्स इंस्टीट्यूशन है, हमारे पास सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स होते हैं, फिर विलेज ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस एंड देन क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस. तो ऑन एन एवरेज एक क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशन में करीब 30 विलेज ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस होंगे, अबाउट 450 SHGs होंगे, अराउंड 5000 मेंबर्स होते हैं. तो ये जो पूरा कॉन्सेप्ट है NRLM का, ये है कि जो कम्युनिटी है उसकी कैपेसिटी बिल्ड करनी है और सेल्फ हेल्प में बिलीव करते हैं. अभी तो हमारे पास हमारे स्टेट रूरल लाइवलीहुड मिशंस हैं और उनके अंदर प्रोफेशनल्स हैं डिफरेंट लेवल्स पर जो हैंड होल्डिंग सपोर्ट प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं ये सारे इंस्टीट्यूशंस के लिए। लेकिन इवेंचुअली जो हम चाहते हैं वो ये है कि ये जो क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस हैं ये इतने स्ट्रेंथेंड हो, इतने स्ट्रॉन्ग हो कि जो भी सपोर्ट अपने मेंबर्स को और अपने सबऑर्डिनेट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को देना है वो इतने स्ट्रॉन्ग बन जाए कि वो सारा सपोर्ट वो प्रोवाइड कर सके। और जैसे ऑनरेबल मिनिस्टर ने कहा कि ये मिशन लखपति है, लाइवलीहुड्स पर हम बहुत फोकस देने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, तो ये सारे एक्टिविटीज को ये क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस ही एंकर करेंगे। तो इस काम को शुरू करने के लिए सिर्फ हमारे पास 2700 से ज्यादा 27,000 से ज्यादा क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस हैं पूरे देश में। करीब 1500 हम मॉडल क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस डेवलप करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, जहां पर ये सारे जो इंटरवेंशंस करने हैं, जो उनको स्ट्रेंथन करने के लिए जो भी कोशिशें करनी है उनको हम ट्राई करेंगे, और ये एक इमर्शन साइट भी बन जाएंगे बाकी क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस के लिए। तो हमारी सारी लर्निंग इन मॉडल क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशन से आएंगी और उसके बेसिस पर हम स्केल अप करेंगे और सभी क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस को इवेंचुअली हमें उस तरह से स्ट्रेंथन करना है। तो आप इसको इस तरह से समझ सकते हैं कि क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस को का जो मेन काम है कि वो आइडेंटिफाई करेंगी कि उनकी जो मेंबर्स हैं, एसएचजी मेंबर्स हैं, उनकी क्या रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं और उनको कैसे सपोर्ट किया जा सकता है उन रिक्वायरमेंट्स को फुलफिल करने के लिए। तो ये बहुत तरह की एक्टिविटीज को एंकर करेंगी। क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस ऑलरेडी फाइनेंशियल इंटरमीडिएशन कर रही हैं, क्योंकि मिशन की तरफ से उन्हें कम्युनिटी इन्वेस्टमेंट सपोर्ट फंड मिलता है, और जो मैच्योर क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस हैं उनके पास कपल ऑफ करोड्स ऑफ कॉर्पस फंड होते हैं जिससे वो अपने मेंबर्स को लोन्स देती हैं। तो वो काम तो कंटिन्यूड रहेगा, लेकिन उसके अलावा जो बैंक्स के साथ लिएजॉन करने का काम है फॉर क्रेडिट सपोर्ट फॉर अदर फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज, वो भी वो करेंगी। जो लाइवलीहुड प्लानिंग, हमें ईच मेंबर की लाइवलीहुड प्लानिंग करनी है, तो उसमें सपोर्ट करना। जो लाइवलीहुड कलेक्टिव्स हम बना रहे हैं, जैसे मिनिस्टर साहब ने कहा, एफपीओज बना रहे हैं, क्लस्टर्स बना रहे हैं, प्रोड्यूसर ग्रुप्स बना रहे हैं, उनको सपोर्ट करना, मार्केट के साथ नेगोशिएट करना ऑन द बिहाफ ऑफ देयर मेंबर्स। इसके अलावा जो भी मेंबर्स के एंटाइटलमेंट्स होते हैं, जो डिफरेंट गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट से आते हैं, डिफरेंट गवर्नमेंट प्रोग्राम्स के थ्रू आते हैं, उनको एक्सेस करने में सपोर्ट करना। उसके लिए जो गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट्स के साथ नेगोशिएट करने की जरूरत है, मार्केट के साथ जो नेगोशिएट करने की जरूरत है। And another very important work that these organizations do is to basically surface or bring forth the demands of the community members at different forums. For example, हम जो अभी भी हम कर रहे हैं, जो ग्राम पंचायत डेवलपमेंट प्लान बनते हैं, उसके अंदर मेंबर्स के जो डिमांड है वो रिफ्लेक्ट हो, या और भी गवर्नमेंट के प्रोग्राम्स हैं उसके अंदर मेंबर्स की क्या डिमांड्स है वो आए। साथ साथ जो पॉलिसी मेकिंग है उसको इन्फ्लुएंस करना, सो दैट प्रो पुअर पॉलिसी मेकिंग हो। साथ में जो डिसीजन मेकिंग ग्राउंड लेवल पर हो वो भी उसमें उसको भी वो इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकते हैं। तो एक इंटरवेंशन जो हम करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं वो ये है कि ग्राम पंचायत लेवल पर जितने भी स्टैंडिंग कमिटीज होते हैं उनमें इनका मैंडेटरी रिप्रेजेंटेशन हो, सो दैट जो भी प्लानिंग उस लेवल पर हो उसमें कम्युनिटी के डिमांड्स भी रिफ्लेक्ट हो पाए। सोशल डेवलपमेंट इश्यूज पर काम करना एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट काम है, जैसे कि फूड से रिलेटेड, न्यूट्रिशन से रिलेटेड, जेंडर रिलेटेड इश्यूज हो, और इन सब इश्यूज को टैकल करने के लिए, एड्रेस करने के लिए जिस तरह की मैकेनिज्म्स की जरूरत है। फॉर एग्जांपल कई जगह पर जेंडर जस्टिस सेंटर्स बनाए जा रहे हैं जिनको ये कम्युनिटी मैनेज कर रहे हैं। तो इस तरह की चीजें लाना, सो एक जो ट्रांसफॉर्मेशनल चेंजेस हम लाना चाहते हैं, जो माइंडसेट में चेंज लाना चाहते हैं, उस पर भी काम करना। जो कम्युनिटी रिसोर्स पर्सन्स, मिनिस्टर साहब ने भी बताया कि हमारे बहुत सारे कम्युनिटी रिसोर्स पर्सन्स हैं, जो पशु सखी, कृषि सखी, बीसी सखी एक्सेट्रा, करीब 3 लाख से ज्यादा हमारे कम्युनिटी रिसोर्स पर्सन्स हैं। तो उनको भी एंकर करना ये क्लस्टर लेवल फेडरेशंस का काम होगा। तो ये जो पूरा कार्य है ये करेंगे, और इसको करने के लिए सबसे पहला तो काम है कि इनको हम रजिस्टर करते हैं अंडर रेलेवेंट एक्ट, सोसाइटीज रजिस्ट्रेशन एक्ट या कोऑपरेटिव एक्ट, तो एक लीगल स्टेटस मिल जाए। और उसके बाद शुरू होता है इनका विजन मेकिंग, मिशन स्टेटमेंट बनाना, गोल्स बनाना, जिसके लिए हमने एक्सटेंसिव एसओपीज बनाए हैं, एक्सटेंसिव रिसोर्स पर्सन्स क्रिएट किए गए हैं, पार्टनरशिप्स डेवलप किए गए हैं, बहुत सारी ट्रेनिंग्स प्रोवाइड की गई हैं। तो ये पूरा ये एक्टिविटी ऑलरेडी शुरू हो गया है और हम एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे हैं कि थोड़े समय में हमारे पास बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग CLFs रेडी होंगे। बहुत ही चैलेंजिंग टास्क है बोथ फॉर द कम्युनिटी एज वेल एज फॉर द SRLMs, लेकिन हमने कुछ CLFs को देखा है जो एक अमेजिंग काम ऑलरेडी कर रहे हैं, तो हम जानते हैं कि ये कर सकते हैं इस टास्क को। तो this is right now the concept of model cluster level federations, and eventually all cluster level federations will be going that way. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, because I'll be coming back to you to discuss the social impact of all your new initiatives. Let me now go to Ms. Chetna Sinha. Well, she started India's first business school for rural entrepreneurs, and she also set up the country's first rural women's bank. And ma'am, if I remember correctly, the central bank, RBI, rejected your proposal to set up the bank because they said, well, illiterate women can't run the bank. And in one of your interviews, I remember you said that in 6 months, they became literate. They were so determined to set up the bank that they, trained themselves, educated themselves, became financially literate, which is so very important, and set up the Mandeshi Bank. That was the Mandeshi story. So from Mandeshi, when you set it up, to today, what has changed, and what are the things that you're seeing at the ground level that need improvement, and where is this headed?
Thank you. And I'm really thankful to all the organizations that sponsors and organizations who have invited me here. And as I respond to you, Rinku, that what is the, like now for after so many years, what do you see on the ground, right? So the first thing, as ma'am said about the women's collective, and I do think that from where these women got a courage to set up the bank, and that was the first collective what Mandeshi got. These women came together, as you said, and they said that we do not know to read and write, but we can count. And I think that was a powerful thing they said. What were they meaning is that women at the grassroots level know finance, number one, know financial planning, number two, know how do we collectively support each other. So I would just like to share, Rinku, that what we have seen on the ground in the mandis, the women, those who are street vendors, how do they, so at Mandeshi, these women, they come together, they take the group guarantee and repayment of the loan. So when we see that, what it means is that, yes, we are very poor, but we are many. And when we come together, we support each other. How do we support each other? Number one, I become a guarantor to other women. We create a group guarantee. That is one. Second, collectively, we deal with the digital financial literacy. Now, at present, at the ground, you are not only talking about financial literacy, but digital financial literacy. Exactly. And here I would just narrate the example, and I'll stop here, that when at the Mandeshi Bank, we were designing the digital financial solution and digital financial literacy. A lot of our women said that, we were saying that to use the banking facility, you would require a PIN number. And our women said that PIN number is great, but why don't we have something more than PIN number? And they said, what about thumb? So we were like, yes, we can use a biometric to open their ATM cards or open their digital wallet. And then when we designed that and did the pilot, you know what our women said? They said, मेरा PIN number तो कोई भी चुरा के ले सकता है, पर मेरा अंगूठा तो कोई नहीं लेके जाएगा ना. And that actually, what did it say? The first thing what they were saying is that it's not just access to finance, but control on finance. That was that. And so in digital financial literacy, even what we focus is that control on finance, control on business, control on financial planning at the business school. And with this, I say that from what I have learned from these women, that even if what our women say, we are poor, but that does not mean you need to give a poor solution. We are using digital wallet, we are using digital banking. The lessons I have learned from our women is that we come together and we do not give poor solutions to poor people. So with that, I would just say that with this whole experience, I'm just ending here that not only it's digital financial literacy, a control on finance, but now women are saying that from group we go to individual entrepreneurship, as Minister said, and Mandeshi Bank is looking at impacting 1 million women entrepreneur, which will not only impact 1 million women entrepreneur, but these 1 million women entrepreneur, each one of them will create 10 jobs. So which means 1 million women entrepreneurs with 10 million jobs. So here I would just like to say that this is the potential you have at a grassroots level.
Oh, the figures speak for themselves, Ms. Sinha. I'll come back to you again on the social impact of it. Let me now go over to Ms. Anjani Kochar. Ms. Kochar, you've been hearing all these stories from the ground. So I would now like you to present a macro picture of how financial inclusion through cooperative banks have translated into broader economic gains. And in this effort, where do we stand globally, especially in terms with emerging economies?
That's a broad question. So let me narrow it down a little bit and then broaden. The broad question is, what is the impact of financial inclusion on the economy and where do we stand? There's no doubt that financial inclusion is intrinsic to achieving economic growth. I want to push it a little bit further back even and say, well, because this is a forum on gender, how important is financial inclusion for women, and does that make a difference? And again, I'll actually go back to the minister's comments and your opening comments, that if we can ensure the economic prospects of women, we make a very big step in that way. So every model of economic growth starts with the financial sector, that you really do have to have this. But the financial sector, I think, is important because it links onto markets, and I'll come back to that later on, perhaps in another question we get. Where did India stand? Say in 2012, India was towards the bottom. Since 2012, starting actually 2010, 2011, with all the financial inclusion drives in the country has made remarkable progress in terms of things. The financial inclusion indicators that are most commonly picked up is how many households have a savings account, how many women are accessing saving accounts. Those numbers have improved tremendously. So even if you go to a state like Bihar now, I think the percentage of women who report owning, having access to a savings account is 70%, 80%. So those have really, there's been remarkable improvement in our poorest states in that. And I would have to say that NRLM and self-help groups have played a large role in this. It hasn't just been the Jan Dhan accounts, etc., but SHGs have pushed to get women these accounts. So in those indicators, I think we've done really well. The second part of the question is, what is the impact on growth? We have to recognize that that is just the first step, opening a savings account. It really is how you use this and where you go with the financial access you achieved. There is where we really need improvement. And so the focus, I think, is if we think of ourselves as moving through different phases, we've sort of gone through phase one, which is giving people the financial assets we need. The second is the really tricky part. And that question is, how do financial assets translate into growth? Yeah. We see huge heterogeneity across the world in this respect. In some cases, there's a very strong link. In other cases, there's a very weak link. And you'll see that in India as well. I'll give you one example. This was in Bihar. We were looking at work on IMGSY, the maternity support program, which gives credit payments directly to women's savings accounts. The economic theory behind this is that once women get money into their accounts, then they have savings and they will actually save more. It's like your income goes directly into your savings account. You don't withdraw at all. You keep it there and your savings accumulates as well. And that's one way of sort of building up your financial strength. What we found in this case was that 2,000 rupees was coming to the account. As soon as it came in, it was being withdrawn immediately. It was being withdrawn by the men in the household. The women would go with the man and he would take out the 2,000 immediately. So the account in that case for women was a pass-through. This is just an extreme example, but it shows you what has to be done. Yeah. There's a lot more from going from the savings account to going that. And I think as we go across the country, you'll see that variation within India itself. You don't have to go outside. So the impact of financial inclusion varies across states. It varies within states, and it actually varies within villages of a gram panchayat. So understanding that variation and understanding what we need to do, I think, is a second step that we need to do.
Thank you, Ms. Kochar. And understanding these variations is what Ms. Brijal Brahmat has been doing. And she's organized a lot of women in urban slums. So we've been talking about rural India, but I will ask Brijal about how women in urban slums have organized themselves to find housing solutions and solutions to sanitation problems in Ahmedabad. Not only that, they have also organized themselves to finding solutions for climate change and designing eco-friendly, sustainable homes. So Brijal, can I just ask you about how difficult it was to organize these women, or how easy it was, and how did they meet the challenge of urban housing?
I represent the Mahila Housing Trust, and we are actually working across 9 states and 36 cities now. But the movement began in Ahmedabad, where we are headquartered. So I think our mission was to improve the housing, living, and working environments of poor women in the informal sector. But the approach was by directly empowering them and giving them, I think most important was giving them technical know-how to be able to, talk and negotiate with governments and private sector on an equal basis. So we started primarily because we had a bottom-up approach. There was no blueprint. We started talking to women in Ahmedabad initially when we were set up. And the first and most primary need was access to household level, water connection or sanitation. And it began from there to expand to include, access to legal electricity, to, energy, to housing finance, to, legal land rights. And the model is that, we did opt for network solutions because the idea was that they have to be, the inequality has to be reduced. So if they were to be mainstreamed as citizens, then they would have should have piped water supply, because that's what the mainstream citizens have access to. So we did go for network solutions, and so entire slum settlements had to get together because the network had to include all households. So they came together as a community-based organization so one woman representing each household, and then they elected their community action groups, which were specifically trained by Mahila Housing Trust in one, understanding the governance systems in the cities, that your administrative zones, wards, because it is much complex in the cities vis-a-vis the rural areas. And then, talking to the governments on how to bring in these improvements with technical know-how and with evidence. So they would understand the governance structure, how to write an application, where their ward or slum is located, etc. Now, having done that for quite some time, because we are now 27-year-old, we realized that, in the urban areas, climate change is something which intersects directly with the kind of built environment that you create. For example, if you build up all the roads and leave no green spaces, obviously heat is going to increase. So it was kind of interconnected, and we started talking to women about climate change. And I suddenly realized that, for these women, the challenges of the life were so huge that they were used to think only short term. So, their focus was more on how to get a water connection or how to have a legal and right vis-a-vis, or from where will the fees of my child come from, vis-a-vis something which was climate change, which was God's act to them, short term, a little bit long term for them, and abstract, because if you talk of, because climate change terminology has disasters as shocks and has slow but potent disasters like heat or air pollution or water resource management. So then on, but the CAG groups had a long-standing relationship with us, and we had directly delivered change into their lives. About 1.8 million people where women had led. So they started talking and understanding climate change. And what really caught their attention was that they were very clear that they did not have they want their children to have the kind of lives that they were living or began with. And so that's what really caught their attention. So I think we had to begin with huge behavior change communication, very, very smartly designed to make them understand these complex, concepts of climate change. And the idea is to demystify the scientific facts so that they can co-create solutions. The second aspect was that we actually engaged with technologists and scientists with these poor women to sort of propagate technologies that would help them adapt or mitigate to the impact. So basically, if I talk of cool roofs, for example, these were deployed in their houses, and the technologists did that, and they were trained by us to take the reading on temperature loggers. Compare it with IMD, and they realized that it was making a change, but they told the technocrat that we don't need corrugations on the roof. We want to use it like a terrace if we invest. So he went back and modified the technology, and now today they are taking loans from us to complete loans to invest into such cooling technologies. So our collaborations with the technologists and scientists were disruptive in nature. It had mutual learning both ways. And then finally, they took these ideas to the city governments and supported in the development of, say, for example, heat action plans or cool roof policies or monsoon action plans at that level. And we started off building on the CAGs, and today probably already 125,000 families. I wouldn't say people, indeed. So it would constitute 5 people for each family on an average have joined this movement of climate change. And I find this approach extremely effective because the women are able to sit on the same table with the government and talk sense. Things like ecosystem approach is needed for climate change, which not even many middle class or educated people have.
That's what's most interesting, Ms. Brahmbhatt. So which takes me to Ms. Krishna. Ms. Krishna, you heard about women changing urban landscapes with climate friendly, and they forced the women in Ahmedabad forced a climate change policy. And you have worked at the ground level on sanitation. So if urban sanitation has been a success story, let's say today, we talk about Swachh Bharat all the time, and if urban sanitation has reached the level where it has been driven by women, right? So what has been your experience of the kind of organization and the determination and, most importantly, resources that women have found to drive the sanitation campaign on the ground?
You're taking me to a portfolio that I've transitioned out of, but thanks anyway. I think actually in gender, I guess if you're a gender champion, you never give that up. What was really exciting for me, both in the urban, as we just talked about, but also in rural, really, the power of collectivization is something we just cannot underestimate, right? Whether it means urban or rural, and the collectivization forms are not replicable between the two sectors. But, if you see NRLM, our evaluation showed that you can increase income by 19%. So we did a third-party evaluation of NRLM. It was one of the largest third-party evaluations for such a large-scale program, unprecedented program, and unprecedented evaluation. But the results were just amazing, right? I mean, even we, I guess, NRLM also did not expect to see these kinds of results. Decline in share of informal loans by 20%, increase in household savings by 20%. So in the case of urban, 2 things that are happening that we're actually taking to our work with NRLM as well, which is bringing together various programs, the collectivization programs plus the government partnership, and converging those two. Right? So when you're talking of resources, if you can show the power that women can display, both the technical skills they bring to the table and the local knowledge and context they bring, that's super helpful. If you can bring other programs to help them upskill a little bit in technical area. So for instance, in the government of Odisha, we had a lot of technical work happening to build out the fecal sludge treatment plants, which is a whole other story where fecal sludge is not treated because network systems actually don't reach poor population. So a lot of our strategy is to look at underserved areas and make sure that we have, innovative solutions. But when we also prove to the government that it would be really helpful to work with urban SHGs, both for community mobilization, understanding and behavior change, to get regular desludging done, we also saw the government say, okay, but actually they can also help us run this infrastructure that we are creating. So in Odisha, the urban secretary and the government decided that all FSTPs will be run by SHGs.
Yeah.
And that we will bring in the skills from the skills ministry, train them for 3 months so that we never get this pushback that women are not qualified.
Yeah.
And not only did they train women SHGs, they also trained transgender SHGs to run them.
Oh,
in addition, yes, and in addition,
that's very interesting.
in addition, all community public toilets. Now that kind of initiative is now definitely diffusing very fast across other states. So Tamil Nadu is thinking about doing that and have started putting in policies. We helped create standard scopes of work. So while these contracts were sometimes given, they weren't given on a standard template, which was very similar to what you would give a private sector contract. So to your question, if you do adequate mobilization, and in rural, we have huge opportunities to do it. Mr. Balamurugan is here. He's been pioneering moving a lot of public procurement to the self-help groups, to the Jivika Didis. So, Didi Ka Rasoi, take-home rations, and NREGA, using schemes like NREGA to build productive assets, not only for SHGs, but also for individual women. So at the end of the guaranteed work days, they actually have a productive asset. So that's also in service of the mission, where we want to move it from just collective strength, which we know is very important, but really get women to have individual livelihoods as well. So I'll just stop to say that this convergence is now actually going to be the next big game changer for both urban and rural.
So since you mentioned Jivika, I will bring in the person who actually implemented Jivika, Mr. Balamurugan. Are you there? Mr. Balamurugan?
Yeah.
My question to you, you implemented Jivika in the first phase, the pilot phase, and CNET steered it through pretty much. And my question to you is, all this is very good, but there a large segment of a women population come in the ultra poor category who can't even access an SHG, for instance. So what strategies did you employ to bring these women or convince these women to be part of a collective and change their fortunes, considering they had no education, no resources, and no intention also, because they weren't even exposed to beyond their own homes and beyond subsistence livelihoods? So you have been through the difficult phases of the Jivika program, which you've been implementing in Bihar. So share some of those experiences and tell us, give us a sense of where this can go, what changes are needed, and how this can be a template for the whole country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting Jivika to speak to all of you. And I heard all the speakers, great experience and then great work. Thank you so much. Congratulations. As far as Jivika is concerned, I'll take 30 seconds to 1 minute to explain about Jivika in the sense how it started. It was started in 2006 with the World Bank funding. I need to tell you, the audience also, it was started by state government, and Honorable Chief Minister is absolutely clear about this program. And because of that, there's a continuity of leadership. I need to mention Mr. Arvind Kumar Chaudhary, who steered this program for initial seven years. It started initially at small scale, and right now this Jivika program is implementing state government owned program called Jivika initially, and then right now it is also implementing NRLM. So we need to thankful to NRLM also. We have 1 million groups, it means 10 lakh SHGs, 65,000 village organizations, and then more than 1,000 cluster level federations. Giant Secretary Madam also mentioned about cluster level federations. I will be talking about this ultra poor program in brief. Before that, where it stands right now, Jivika. We have 10 million members, more than 1 crore members. We have our presence in every village.
Oh.
So because in every village of Bihar, more than 10 million, I said. And in actually, one of the important trigger for SHG members to come together is a thrift, access to credit. That is the most fundamental trigger which makes them to become a member of a group. That's where everything starts. Right now, Jivika could able to access more than 21,000 crores of credit linkage from banks, and last year it was around 5,500 crores. Why I'm saying this, these are all helping them to come out from poverty. I'll not spend much time here. Some of the families are not able to come out. That's what you mentioned about ultra poor. Though they become part of SHG, they can't even afford 5 rupees of saving per week. They are not able to continue. And apart from SHG, you have government programs for SST families. There are so many programs which give a subsidy, 1 lakh rupees, 50,000 rupees, but they are not able to move forward beyond a point because there's a very important element of coaching and handholding support which is missing. So that's when there's a program worldwide. It is called graduation approach, through which you work with this kind of ultra poor families. One of the basic missing thing is their own self confidence. They don't have that self confidence. वो लगता है वो हम नहीं कर पाएंगे, मेरे पास वो शक्ति नहीं है, आत्मविश्वास नहीं होती है. तो इसके लिए एक स्टेट गवर्नमेंट ने एक प्रोग्राम बनाया था, that is called सतत जीविकोपार्जन योजना. This is sustainable livelihood program to select most ultra poor families, the poorest of the poor, and work with them. And the best part of this program is that is being done by SHG itself. The institutions of the poor, that village organization is a nodal agency which selects the poorest of the poor. In a normal government setup, whenever you select the list of people, you will always end up having an inclusion and exclusion error. When you do it through these community-based organizations, particularly when I mentioned about Vivo, the inclusion and exclusion error is very minimum. So they've selected these families, and this is being implemented by Vivo. The important component, as I mentioned, there's a component of subsidy. The most important element here is coaching. What we did, initially we trained all the village organizations. More than 45,000 village organizations did this exercise. They have selected 2 to 3 poorest of the poor families, and then they selected the families for this program. We also developed a cadre of people called master resource persons. One master resource person, most of them are women. Again, they come from SHG. We train them, we give some honorarium. Again, the selection is also done by village organization, cluster level federation. They deal with 30 to 40 families of ultra poor. We have defined coaching modules. One of the most important element, again, apart from coaching, is household visit. They go and visit the household. Initially, 10,000 rupees is given as a grant to start some activity, and we also give 7,000 rupees as a support money for initial 7 months. And other important aspects, like as one of the speakers talked about Jan Dhan account, all these ultra poor families, we have 1,44,000 families right now under this program. The target is to take it to almost 2 lakh. They have Jan Dhan account, but they are not operating it because they don't have money. Also, even government money comes, that it becomes. What we did, we made them to operate the account. We trained them, we made them to use that account, and then they started doing some activity. Most of the families, because they are landless, they started doing some small enterprises. So right now, to cut it short, this SJY program is a big program, and we have 1,44,000 families. We did some pilot. Based on that pilot, we have we are carrying out this entire program. And out of 1,44,000 families, most of the I should say more than 50% of the families moved from one ladder to other. They started saving. We have some impact study conducted. They started saving 250 rupees. And one of the important other aspect of this program is they are made as part of SHGs. Started attending SHGs. They started becoming part of SHG and then start taking help from SHG members also. So that is how the SHG platform is being used to implement one of the biggest programs, Ultra Poor program in Bihar. And we are getting extraordinary support from NRLM. And I am confident and trust this program may get implemented at national level. I stop here. I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So requesting the audience to please post your questions on the chat box after I finish the panel discussion. The panelists will be open to taking questions from you all, so please keep posting. So now let me go to Hasina Kharbi, founder and chairperson, Impulse NGO Network, who has been trying to bring about a change at her own level. Hasina, you are known for creating the Meghalaya model. So there was a lot of trafficking in the Northeast, and so you decided to attack the problem of trafficking holistically by providing livelihoods to women. And so much so that Meghalaya model is now globally recognized as a rehabilitative mechanism and an empowering mechanism for women. So you trained them in, you skilled them and you gave them jobs and you make them sure they were employment ready and they were able to run their little businesses. So take us through that and tell us why the Meghalaya model can apply anywhere.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be joining from Turkey and speaking to this panel today as I'm traveling. The Meghalaya model today is known as the Impulse model, as it grew from the state of Meghalaya where I come from. But at the end of the day, it is a model that has scaled very deeply in the state, as well as scale out in the 8 states of the Northeast of India, and scale out again in the neighboring countries of Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Nepal. Now, the factor of why this evolved, it evolved because we have seen the unsafe migration from the Northeast of India because of the opportunities outside, the aspirational outside, and the lack of employment and entrepreneurial support system and market resilience, that a lot of traditional skills that women were inheritance of, when they come from indigenous population, did not have a market avenue any longer. And that has left them to leave the skills behind, which has been a transfer between from their great grandmothers to their mothers and to them, because they felt that that has no more relevance, that there's no more economic. When actually, when we look back in the historical factor of it, that has been the economic of the Northeast, where today the border hut reopening has a lot to do with traditional skills in the region of where I come from. Now, having seen that, the Meghalaya model, which stands on 12 pillars, which is the 6 P's and the 6 R's, which is partnership, prevention, protection, policing, press, and prosecution, which bring together the public and the private to actually intervene unsafe migration, which is leading to a huge, large-scale human trafficking interstate across the borders and to Southeast Asia, has been one common factor, the economic. When women do not have the choice to choose in the economic, and that does not have a resilience market, which actually happens to be one of the skill set of the indigenous population, they become vulnerable because what they choose to leave out, they get employed in sectors that makes them highly vulnerable because they have not much choices. And the skill set is not apparently that strong where they could actually make choices or they can actually enable those choices. So the fact that we try to invest on traditional skill of the indigenous women from the Northeast and looking at these vulnerable communities where the migration was higher than many of the other sectors, and also looking at the disaster prone area like the Assam and all the neighboring state where every year when flood hits, people are moving out. How could we actually give them choices not to migrate unsafely. So the process that stood up was centralizing raw material distribution as an enabler to work from home. The work from home element was that they don't have to go back to in a factory base or in a common facility center base, but they were all weaving from home with the indigenous pattern that they represent in terms of tribes, because we have various tribes in the northeast of India. And we were looking at a resilience market where Impulse Social Enterprises, which just happens to be the sister concern of the Impulse NGO network, where the whole process of the Meghalaya model went into the Impulse model, because when the Meghalaya model was born, it was born in the state of Meghalaya. But when you go and replicate in another state, when they scale out and scale deep, you cannot give the name of a state. That's why it turned up to be Impulse model. And the factor that when we were intervening, the number of cases that we have dealt over the years, we have seen, like I just said, the common threat of economic. So we realized that if we have to build resilience market, we also have to give women a choice to choose. And the choice to choose is work from home. So, in the last 14 years, the work from home was an enabler because they choose the time on when they would be weaving the traditional pattern and the kind of varieties of pattern that has been provided to them, where the centralized marketing has been created by Impulse and Power. So that is where the birth of addressing that choices to women has to be a resilience market if we are trying to build in skill set which is traditional in nature. Because a lot of time when we talk about weavers and artisans, we always forget the fact that if the market is non-consistent, then you don't find women to be engaged in that for a longer time, But then if you have to compete in the larger scale of the commercial market, it's so important that there has to be an enabler. And for us, the business model was an enabling factor of centralized raw material distribution for quality control, engaging storytelling of the pattern, because it gives them the feel proud factor of where they are and what they come from, and the uniqueness of the product that is sustainable in nature. And in the course of time, it's also creating a balance of sustainable fabric and sustainable yarn, because there always has to be a balance between the yarn and the producing, of the textile. So that has created an opportunity of economic where it decreases the unsafe migration amount over the last 14 years as a prevention to address human trafficking. And that has been tested enough. So like the Impulse model got the World Innovation Prize, where it's scale deep, it's scale out, and it's scale up. And the Innovation Prize brought together that we have to have prevention measures, which is economic and sustainable. If it is not economic and sustainable, then you cannot really tell people not to migrate and safely. To make that a possibility, there has to be an engagement which is eco-friendly, which is also addressing climate change in the Eastern Himalayan belt. And that is also one factor of we introducing Airy Yarn and the Airy Bank. The fact of Airy Bank is basically having these raw material bank where the engagement of balance, that we see that if a woman is spending 3 to 4 hours a day weaving according to the time, choices that she chooses, which is fair trade in nature, and there's an investment of the raw material and the fabric is coming back to us, what happened is she is earning almost 7,000 to 8,000 a month, which is a huge amount of money, spending few hours of her time. And that is her money. And it's not like a substitute income to the family, because the husband is also engaged. And that's why it's very gender, enabler, because the husband would take the cycle and go and distribute the raw material while the woman was weaving, but they also engaged in the food security initiative of the ecosystem, that during COVID-19, all our Impulse Empower artisans became the support system for food security to many other who was not part of the system. And after COVID, we found that many of the women wanted to engage on reviving traditional skill as a market enabler, because it gives them that freedom of choice of economic. So what I wanted to conclude here is that India is diverse. It has a lot of indigenous traditional skills in many sectors.
Yeah.
But if we create this enabler as a choice of economic, and we make women to choose not to migrate and safely, then what happened? We reduce the violation of crime that happened to women, and sending the children out, or sending young girls out to be vulnerable, because that's the learning lesson that we had over the last 25 years of the evolvement of the impulse model. I will be happy to open to questions.
Yeah, thanks. So I will just go back to Ms. Kejriwal. Ms. Kejriwal, are you there? We just heard about, Hasina elaborated so beautifully on the market linkages, and the minister mentioned a lot of market linkages and market enablers by the NRLM. What kind of market linkages are you engaged in from the government side with private players or through exhibitions and expositions abroad? And what are the facilitators that you have thought about to build a market relationship with the SHGs?
Yeah, thank you, Rinku. So for market linkages, we have actually been trying a lot of interventions. One, the Honorable Minister also mentioned was about the online activities. We have these now MOUs with Amazon and other such organizations. In addition, what NRLM has been doing in the past is holding these Saras Melas. These are held at the national level, about 3 to 4 Saras Melas, where the products of the self-help group being manufactured all across the country is given a platform for exposure. Not only that, the women, when they come out here, they also learn about, through various workshops, etc., about the kind of products that sell, the kind of products that interest the consumers today. And they are taught a lot about how to talk to the customers, how to package their material, etc. So those are, and also the states, we support all the states also to hold these Saras Melas. In addition, as Minister also mentioned, we have a showroom on Baba Khadak Singh Marg, again to showcase a lot of the SHG members, the products being prepared by the SHG women. These are some of the activities, but there is a lot actually going on in the states. So these are, having these marketing linkages with private players. Like, for example, for vegetables, etc., or fruits, there would be some linkages with organizations like Big Bazaar, etc. Similarly, where there are places where honey is being produced, so there is some understanding with Dabur or similar organizations for procuring the honey and then selling it in the markets. So these are many initiatives being taken by the state governments. It would be really difficult to talk about all, but there's lots of activities happening. In addition, we are now trying to create these collectives, livelihood collectives, like the producer groups, the producer enterprises. There are large producer enterprises run completely by these women members. And particularly in the dairy sector, we have these large producer enterprises, which are also being supported by the NDDB technical wing, the NDS. And we are forming clusters also, clusters of artisans, etc. We actually have a World Bank project, which is called NRETP, National Rural Economic Transformation Project, under which a lot of these activities are being piloted, with a lot of value chains being created. So numerous efforts being taken already, and a lot more proposed for the future also.
Okay, so thanks, Ms. Kejriwal. Let me now go over to Ms. Chetna Sinha. Ms. Sinha, and this brings, when we are talking about funding, let's talk about this. What about private investors? We don't get very many private investors for women-led businesses, at least so for, women cooperatives. How do you bridge that gap, and where do you see the funding problem being addressed?
So this is very, very important, Rinku. You said about the private investors, right? That when women set up the business, and particularly when women graduate from SHG to individual businesses.
Yes.
Here I would particularly say that. And even if she's a part of SHG, but when you want to start a business, you need a capital to start the business. Now, one is that the capital, you get it from the bank. And where there are, like, women do not have a collateral. So there is so much of pain at the banking side that if you do not have a collateral, you don't get the loans. That is one. And the second is that when we are talking about when I understand that you have mentioned the private investor, it is here you are saying not the banks, but private investors who invest in women's business, right? That is, I would not talk about the startups who are like, registered private limited company. They have that whole access to stock exchange board. So I'm talking about the women who do not have an access to, say, SEBI or the investment, but still they require a capital, and how would they get it? Here I would say what Mandeshi has done. Number one, there are many women who are actually want to support other women, and then they are wealthy women. So here you create a sort of a grant equity, where you come here with some of the equity, but that equity is equity in the women's business, but it is more like a grant where they would support them, but they will also participate in their business. How will they participate is they will support them to create and help them to manage, how to do the financial management of that business. Because when you talk about the private investment, the most important part is how do you do the financial management of your business, and then I many times you find that, having the balance sheet, profit and loss account, all those are not very easy. So I would just say that when you talk about the private investment, it is very important now that you have those type of a technology software. Like I'm talking about Mera Khata, Mera Bill. These are the apps which women are using for their financial management, through which making a very simple entry of their business, and then they get the scale of the business. That is another. The second, which I would like to share, and I'll be very brief, is that Mandeshi has this not only private investment in machinery, so where women get a revolving grant to buy the machinery. A lot of people are talking about, market linkage and all that. But the biggest thing comes that when you want to scale your business, the quality control comes, right? So how to standardize your product? If you want to scale and standardize the product, the biggest thing comes is that I should have a machinery. When women comes, everything is manual. Why? When men comes in the business, there are machines. So I would here say that the private investment can come in the form of hypothecation machinery, where private investor says that I would provide you a machinery, I would hypothecate you it, and you produce it. So if I'm making, say, selling idlis to the restaurants, in per day I'm doing 5,000, I can do 5 lakhs, or rotis I can do. So here I would say that when private investment comes, then your standardization and scale also comes, and the financial planning also comes, which help women from graduating from proprietorship business to LLPs or private limited company. What I'd like to say here is that it is very important that we have a women entrepreneurs, but it is very important that how do we make our women entrepreneurs owning the small scale business, where again I would come that then they will be able to create the jobs for women. And I would like to hear that when I was co-chairing Davos in World Economic Forum, we did the study. And when the study showed that it will take 135 years to close the gender gap. In entrepreneurship. Now, do we want to wait that long? My answer is no. But if you not want to wait that long, then it is very important that we have to unlock the private capital also and scale it. And that is how, where we will be able to, as our previous speakers discussed about the individual entrepreneurship, I would just like to say, even with the FPOs, government has this Kejriwal mem, I'm saying, like equity grant concept. So it is very important that private investors also scale up with this whole equity grant concept, this will help women to register their business, to structure into from proprietorship to LLPs and private limited companies, and then they will be able to come into mainstream sector. So here I would just say, with these, I would like to say that let us have that, that when we talk about women entrepreneurs, we now say that, okay, we will have these million women-owned companies. Why don't we have those numbers also? Because then we will be able to change the index globally about women entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sinha, for that very insightful perspective that you gave us. I would now quickly go over to Anjani, and then I'll follow it up with Ms. Krishna and Bijal. And my common question to you all would be to address the funding problem. You know, Anjani, I'll begin with you. Anjani, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. The thing is that when it comes to SHGs and women-led cooperatives, you know, there is always a charitable mentality associated with it. Okay, we gave them grants, they organized themselves, they did their own little thing. And this is following from Ms. Sinha's discussion. There is no talk about scaling it, upscaling it, and making it a big business or attracting funding for it. So how do you think this perception can be changed, and what are the solutions that are possible?
I actually think that NRLM is doing exactly the right thing. It's focused completely on scale. It's a big departure from the previous program, SGSY, that NRLM took over. I think you got bits of this from Ms. Kejriwal's talk, but NRLM departs from this smaller model to just take small self-help groups. Everybody saves. There are these thrift and savings groups. NRLM recognized that is not a good concept in terms of income growth and consumption. And one of the main reasons it's not good is that you have to scale. And so NRLM, I think, is completely focused on scale. It's a truly amazing program, because of how different it is from all the other programs. You asked this question of how do we scale? And again, I think NRLM has put a really important lesson in place. So think of these very small self-help groups that have come together. These groups are all women from the same neighborhood. So you're literally picking your 8 neighbors. They're all very much like you, same socioeconomic background, same caste background, etc. And the group is small. How do you scale that? Well, you can't make that group by itself grow big, because once you do that, you've lost the homogeneity that makes a group successful. You've lost the small size that builds community. And so what NRLM put in place was this federated structure that Ms. Kejriwal spoke about. You take self-help groups and make them into village organizations. So the village organizations now is a smaller, but still larger thing then. And then you go up to cluster level federations. But the critical part of that is still, how do you scale properly? And I think that requires a focus on groups that, again, has to belong to this second generation of reforms. So if scaling, or if market access and income growth requires aggregation, large groups, but also requires heterogeneity, you have to capacitate the poor, which means you can't just surround them with other poor people. You have to bring in new influences, new ideas, new thinking. So somehow you have to scale in a way that also creates this heterogeneity, and that's the challenge. So if a village organization reflects self-help groups, it's going to have the same social composition as all the self-help groups. And similarly, if a cluster level federation comes from VOs, it's going to have the same socioeconomic composition. So thinking about what are the types of groups we need, recognizing that the groups that work for insurance and security are different from the groups and the structures that work for income growth. How can we do that? Just quickly before I end, I'm sure others will mention this also. The other remarkable feature of self-help groups and NRLM is it's not subsidy driven. The savings come internally from the groups. Those savings accumulate and aggregate. Many of the groups, the program has been running for 10 years. So the amount of savings that is within self-help groups, VOs and CLFs is really quite amazing. So this aggregation of funds has been one of the huge successes of NRLM.
Yeah. Thanks. So we are actually running short of time because we have to take the audience questions. So Ms. Bijal, just 30 seconds to you. on how do you, how has MHT met its funding challenges? How have you overcome the funding challenge? Very quickly. You're on mute, Miss Bijal.
Sorry. Yeah, so I think ours is a very sustainable low-cost model because we pull in huge investments from the government and the private sector to actually develop the habitats, and we concentrate on capacity building. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, we aggregate them at the ward level, which is the largest, lowest unit of governance in a city, and then make federations at the city level, and these are across cities. Organizationally, the funding challenge that we have met through a fair scale is that we have a not-for-profit, we have a for-profit company, and we also have these cooperatives of women, which are profitable institutions, and we rely on each other and probably cross-subsidize our activities. I think the third very important element which has helped us to also scale across to Global South, Bangladesh and Nepal, especially the climate change model, which has received a lot of United Nations award now, UNFCCC and others, is that we have been able to transfer this model to partners in Nepal and Bangladesh. So I think partnership is also a very important model of scale. Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Krishna, are you there quickly? 30 seconds. Yes, how we can scale businesses and how we can make it sustainable, viable, get funding.
I think Anjani and Ms. Kejriwal, etc., we're all on that path. I think it is two things that we are helping NRLM do is also help to create a very strong digital architecture. So while the current MIS systems really look at the SHG credit linkages, once we have a strong database and the credit histories of individual women entrepreneurs, we think this will be a very big thing, something that Chetna also spoke about, right? To have credit histories for individual members so that they can get. And then I think bringing multiple cluster relevant federations and providing them some sort of enterprise support system. This is something that we've seen and supported at SEVA, which works also with about more than 1 million women. That has shown really good results. So the soft skills, the business skills, those are really important. And over time, we can actually use those itself to become enterprises, which is the heterogeneity. So you bring a bunch of professionals, they pay. And if you look at the Amul model, that is exactly what they did.
Exactly.
They brought the cooperatives and you provide that kind of support. So those are some of the models that we are hoping to work with in many of our states. And, we work very closely with multiple state governments and of course with Ma'am Kejriwal and many other colleagues at NRL. So those are kind of the frontiers we're looking at. But definitely scale is important. But the large scale of the CLFs are really the ones that eventually they have to graduate out from NRLM, right? They have to become these sustainable business enterprises in and of themselves, of women, by women, run by women.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now, since we are almost completely out of time, we'll just open the floor to questions. But before that, let's listen in to Lakini Barua and her revolutionary story of the Kanaklata Bank. She left school, then she self-financed her education by stitching clothes, and then she joined a cooperative bank and finally opened one of her own in the Northeast. So let's listen in to Lakini Barua, founder, Mahila Urban Cooperative.
नमस्कार फैमिली जो मेरा फैमिली है वो बहुत गरीब फैमिली से आई हूँ मैं, लेकिन बहुत संस्कृतिवान फैमिली है और मैं छोटी सी उम्र में खुद का ये पढ़ने के लिए और जीवन धारण करने के लिए बहुत कुछ संग्राम मैंने स्टार्ट किया और मैं छोटी सी उम्र में ट्यूशन करना स्टार्ट किया, कपड़ा बुनना स्टार्ट किया। ये समवाय के जरिए सूता मिलते हैं और ये इलाके में कपड़ा बुन के पूरा स्कूल ड्रेस तैयार करके मैं समवाय भंडार में देती हूँ। उसके लिए मुझे बहुत उसी समय बहुत पारिश्रमिक मिला है मुझे। ये हटाने के लिए छोटी सी उम्र में ही मैंने बहुत प्रचेष्टा बहुत कदम उठाया और मैं पढ़ना भी बहुत कष्ट से करना पड़ा। मैं 1967 में पढ़ना मैंने शुरू बंद कर दिया और पढ़ना बंद करके मैं एक समवाय बैंक में नौकरी किया और उसी तरह मैंने अपने घर भी संभालने के लिए और खुद का जो ये पढ़ने का जो खर्च ये भी मैंने निकाला। ऐसे ही मैं सहेलियों के साथ ही मैंने और उनके माताजियों के साथ ही मैंने बहुत सारा ये समवाय का काम उठाया और बाद में मैंने देखा महिलाओं के लिए बहुत कुछ करने का है, क्योंकि असम जो एक ये लिस्ट डेवलप एरिया है नॉर्थ ईस्ट और असम भी बहुत अनुन्नत है। अभी तो बहुत चेंज हुआ लेकिन और कुछ और भी बहुत चेंज करने का है। और आज से 30 साल से आगे मैंने ये समवाय बैंक में जब नौकरी कर रही थी तब मैंने खुद देखा और ये निर्णय किया कि महिलाओं के लिए अलग सा बैंकिंग व्यवस्था होना चाहिए। और इसमें मेरे हस्बैंड ने बहुत मुझे एनकरेज किया, क्योंकि समवाय व्यवस्था में ऐसा है कि डिस्ट्रिक्ट सेंट्रल कोऑपरेटिव बैंक के जो एम्प्लॉई हैं उन लोगों ने प्राइमरी अर्बन कोऑपरेटिव बैंक के लिए डिमांड दे सकते हैं। और इसलिए मैंने उसी टाइम ही 1990 में मैंने ऐसा शिक्षा कुछ नहीं था, तो उन लोगों ने समझ लिया अपने आप को हमारे लिए बैंक अकाउंट नहीं चाहिए, क्योंकि ये पुरुष लोग जो उपार्जन करते हैं वो उपार्जन से हमारा संसार चल जाता है। और हमारे लिए एक बैंक अकाउंट ज़रूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि हमें खुद इनकम नहीं किया और ये बैंक में संचय भी नहीं कर पाएंगे। लेकिन उनका मन का परिवर्तन करने में हमारा कुछ टाइम लगा, लेकिन वो परिवर्तन अभी अपने आप लोगों का भी ये मालूम है। और अभी हम लोगों ने भी ये फील किया, अनुभव किया कि ये परिवर्तन महिलाओं के बीच आ गया। अभी बैंक अकाउंट खोलने के लिए महिलाओं को समझाना नहीं पड़ता, वो खुद आके बैंक में अकाउंट खोलते हैं। ये तो 0 से ही स्टार्ट हुआ था और अभी ये बैंक का जो अंशीदार हैं ये 12,000 क्रॉस किया। और जो बैंक का जो डिपोजिटर हैं, अकाउंट होल्डर हैं, वो भी 43,000 से ज़्यादा हो गया अभी। ये काम आज आप लोगों की भी नज़र में आया और मुझे भी आप लोगों को मिलना संभव हुआ, इसलिए मैं बहुत आभारी हूँ। थैंक यू।
Well, that was, we heard from Ms. Lakini Barua. She was very ill, but she did send in this message for this very special session. So we'll now open the floor to questions. So is Ms. Renuka Gaikwad there in the audience? Renuka Gaikwad is founding member of the Change Foundation, and she has a question. Ms. Gaikwad?
Yeah, good evening all. So thank you so much for giving me opportunity. My question is to all the panelists. Aren't the women, the working women are becoming the grassroots level, mostly at the grassroots level, are becoming more vulnerable because her daily working hours are getting increased. She has to do her household work, she has to do the homemaking work, the children's, the elderly people's caregiving work, and then she has to do her job. So what I think is definitely the opportunity to work and the income is boosting her courage, and her mobility is also getting enhanced. But aren't they becoming more vulnerable because their mental and physical as well as their emotional health will get hampered due to increased working hours? And the second question is, like, what kind of policies are in progress to make the societies, make the families, and to make the organizations women friendly? Because all the policies are like equal for men, because working hours are 8 hours. If we join any private limited company, there are 8 hours for women and 8 hours for men. So are there any policies to make either the families like taking equal, taking the fruits of equal opportunities, as well as taking the equal responsibilities of the family and homemaking work, or either this, or making the organizations women friendly, like creating the environment, like making the working hours to 6 hours for women as compared to the 8 hours to men. Thank you so much.
Okay, Ms. Gaikwad, I got the gist of what you want to say is that, you know, if a woman, and today we are talking about collectives at the rural and urban level. So work environment works mostly in offices. So we are going to stick to the collective model. Can I ask Ms. Sinha to answer that question, you know, because you've had this had this experience of dealing with women who were handling chores, and then they upskilled themselves and educated themselves and trained themselves. So how did they manage their working hours, and what can be a formula to, you know, get women who have to fill up their certain quota of home chores and training at SHGs? How is it possible to make an easy transition at the grassroots level? Sure. You did that with Mandeshi.
Yes, thanks. So first of all, you know, when you say that women are having a double burden, I would say yes, they are having a double burden. On one side, looking after the household and then businesses, but they choose to do that. That is number one. The second, how do you reduce that double burden? And I would just say that at Mandeshi, what we do is that we give an award to men who share their property with women, who share their work with women, and who share their life. Because that is very important. How are you going to reduce the burden? Not that women should sit at home, right? It is that who is going to share their work. And what our women said, and what we have seen in the community also, that if men share the women's work, they become a role model. So Mandeshi gives an award to men who share their work, both housework and also who shares their economic assets also, which means sharing the property. So on one side work and then give the dignity. If you do that and create those men role model, that will actually change the society.
Then I think there were two questions which we have already answered. Can the women collective at ground level be sustainable? I think our panelists have answered that. This question came from Raghavi Purti Metla. So your question hopefully has been answered. And the other by Nalin Rai, group-based activity has shifted to individual-focused approach in the collective. How does it affect the collective process in terms of affinity and cohesion? I think our panelists suitably described that how, you know, the individual orientation has actually given to a collective mentality and how women pull up other women. So with that, we now move to, can I request Mr. Is he online? Is Mr. Brahmachari online? Mr. Brahmachari, sir?
Yeah, I'm there, Riku. I'm there.
Yes, Mr. Brahmachari, we would like, let me invite him. He is the lead researcher from Kriya University. May I invite you, sir, to present the closing remarks on this very enlightening session and shed a little light on the data bank that you have already collected on women's collectives.
Thank you, Riku, for giving me the opportunity over here. But I must say the people are Neeta ma'am and Madhu and Anjani, we've been all grappling with this issue of how making sure the collectives, you know, are really effective at the grassroots level. And if you see the discussion across all the panelists, or the couple of words which actually popped out across when we were talking, and across Madhu, Anjani, and everybody, Vijay and everyone they're talking was about the issues of control, about the issues of decision, and also about going beyond the technical know-how and the equal basis of how this know-how transfers happen. And on the important thing, someone did mention about sit on the same table. You know, with the collectives at the grassroots level, which NRLM is, you know, the architecture which NRLM is putting together, be it the VOs, be it the CLFs, or be it the SHG groups, you know, they are the backbone organizations on which you're talking about financial inclusion, livelihoods, you're talking about FNH, the family and health and nutrition work. So all that is happening through this whole collective process. And there, as you are talking about it, the pictures is also not rosy at the grassroots level. These women groups do come across, you know, issues of gender norms and the barriers. You know, the whole patriarchal society really bears down upon them, and how there is another struggle which they do to address those issues. And as collectives, in most of the cases, they have been very interestingly able to address it. And the fantastic, I think, NRLM recognized that addressing gender as part of the overall architecture of NRLM would be critical in making sure that, you know, making sure that the programming is much more effective. So they started the whole talk about making gender as part of their financial inclusion work, talking about, you know, gender as part of FNHW and livelihoods work. So that became again a full big story which Neeta Mahan has pioneered and sort of pushed the whole work across. And these are through which these groups and the collectives have been able to talk about rights, entitlements, and also address gender-based violence. So these are a combination. The collectives do bring a lot of power, and that power is changing the grassroots story. Although I would say the story is evolving, and there are, you know, lessons we are learning every day, but there is that shift happening across, and definitely with the individual woman and at the group level, as they are able to sort of get their enterprises going, or individual enterprise, group enterprises, or individual enterprises going, this ability to choose is going to make a difference as we go along. And important is that make this difference at scale. And NRLM, I think one of the big programs which we have heard a lot about, does go out to, you know, 711 districts of the country, from 6,900 blocks of the country, and across 34 states. You know, you're impacting large scale women. And all these examples of Dijal, Hasina from Meghalaya, we need to look at how we bring these experiences together and fine tune and take this programming forward at scale. I will stop at here. Over to you, Rinku.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So thank you all the panelists for a very enlightening session and a lot of takeaways. It can make a policy paper complete in itself. And whether in a small way somewhere, I would like to say that all of us are the story makers ourselves. And today, probably by holding this discussion, we became the story. So now let me request my colleague Pooja to present the vote of thanks.
Hi, thanks Rinku, and thank you Mr. Brahmachari. We'd also like to thank our presenting partner, IE for helping us put this series together. Everyone who joined us today, thanks again.